The Christmas tree in Terminal 4 at JFK was enormous. Gold and white lights blinked against the gray December ceiling. And somewhere behind the security gates, a speaker was playing "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas" in a key that felt just slightly too cheerful for reality. Sloane Mercer stood near the baggage carousel, one hand gripping a paper coffee cup, the other resting on her son Beckett's shoulder. He was 9 years old, wearing the navy blue coat she'd buttoned for him that morning in their Chicago apartment. And he was bouncing on the balls of his feet because he thought they were here to surprise his father. They were. Just not in the way Sloane had planned. She had rehearsed the moment in her head the entire flight from O'Hare. Ford turning around, seeing them. That slow smile spreading across his face. Beckett launching himself forward. The three of them in the middle of the busy terminal, holding each other like a real family. She had even worn the red wrap dress he once told her made her look like herself. Whatever that meant. She saw Ford before he saw her. He was standing near Carousel 6, tall and sharp-looking in his charcoal wool coat, the Mont Blanc pen clipped to his inside pocket the way it always was. He was laughing. Sloane noticed that first, the laugh, easy and open. The kind of laugh she hadn't heard from him in maybe 2 years, maybe longer. The woman beside him had dark hair pulled over one shoulder. She was younger, maybe 30, wearing a camel-colored coat and carrying a weekender bag that Sloane recognized as Louis Vuitton. Ford had his hand on the small of her back. Not casual, deliberate, familiar. Sloane did not move. Beckett went still beside her. He had seen it too. His small hand tightened around her fingers, not out of excitement now, but out of something quieter and harder to name. He stood there staring at his father for a long moment. Then he looked up at his mother. "Mom," he said. His voice was careful, the way children's voices get when they sense something is very wrong, but don't have the words for it yet. That man, he looked back at Ford once more. He forgot how to be my dad. Sloane felt the coffee cup crumple slightly under her grip. The carousel began to move. Somewhere behind her, the Christmas song ended and another one started, and she stood in the middle of the terminal at JFK with 11 years of marriage dissolving quietly in her chest like sugar in rain. She did not cry. Not yet. She pulled Beckett close and turned them both toward the exit. And she thought, he doesn't know we're here. And she made a decision in that exact moment. She was going to keep it that way. What she didn't know yet was that the woman with the Louis Vuitton bag already knew exactly who Sloane was, and had for a very long time. Sloane Mercer had not always been the kind of woman who waited. In her 20s, she had been the first one through the door. Interior design program at the University of Illinois. A thesis project that got picked up by a regional architecture magazine. A small studio apartment in Wicker Park that she furnished herself with thrift store finds and a lot of paint. She had been sharp and restless and full of plans that had no room for anyone else's timeline. And then she met Ford Ashby at a gallery opening in River North. He was 34, a corporate attorney from Manhattan doing temporary work with a Chicago firm. He wore a gray suit with no tie and talked about property law like it was philosophy. She thought he was interesting. She did not think he would change the entire direction of her life. They dated for 8 months across 2 cities. Then Ford got a permanent position back in New York, and he asked her to come with him, and she said yes before she finished thinking it through. She was 29. She thought love meant going where the other person was going. In New York, she tried to rebuild her design practice from scratch. New city, no connections, no referrals. Ford was encouraging at first. He told people at dinner parties that his wife was talented and she was grateful for it. She did not notice then how quickly those conversations always circled back to him. The clients came slowly. Then Beckett was born, and the clients stopped coming altogether for a while. Ford said it made more sense for her to focus on the baby since his income covered everything. She agreed. She told herself it was temporary. 3 years passed like that. When she finally started rebuilding again, a small client base, a rented studio in Brooklyn, work she was genuinely proud of, Ford's schedule got busier. He worked late. He flew to Chicago for cases. He was in depositions, in meetings, in conference calls that lasted past midnight. She learned not to ask. She learned, without anyone teaching her explicitly, that the cost of keeping the peace was staying small. Last spring, she had opened a real studio space. Mercer Design, on 1,200 square feet in Lincoln Square, Chicago. She had moved back 6 months ago because Beckett was struggling in New York. That was the reason she told Ford, the reason she told herself. But the truth was, she had been disappearing for years inside that marriage. And Chicago was where she remembered what she looked like. What she had never told anyone, not even Wren, was that the night before she moved back to Chicago, she found a hotel receipt in Ford's coat pocket for a room at the Beekman, and she chose not to look at it too closely. She did not go back to the hotel that night in New York. She came back to Chicago instead, settled Beckett into his new room, enrolled him in the school 3 blocks from their apartment, and threw herself into the studio with the kind of focus that is really just controlled grief. She did not think about the receipt. She called Ford every evening at 8. He picked up most of the time. The conversations were fine, normal, empty. It was the 2nd week of November, 6 weeks before the airport, when the first real crack appeared. Sloan was reviewing her bank account, the joint one, the one they had used for everything since the early years. And the balance was wrong. Not overdrawn, just wrong. Lower than it should have been by almost $30,000, drawn down in smaller amounts over 8 months. Transfers to an account she didn't recognize. She sat at her kitchen table with her MacBook open and a mug of coffee going cold beside her, and she stared at the numbers for a long time. Then she called Ford. He answered on the 2nd ring. He sounded distracted. She told him there were some unusual transfers in the joint account, and she was trying to understand them. There was a pause, very brief, maybe 2 seconds. And then he said it was a retainer for an outside accountant he had hired to manage some investments. He would explain it better later. He had a call in 5 minutes. She said, "Okay." She hung up. She did not believe him. She opened a new browser tab and pulled up the account transfer details again. The receiving account number ended in 7742. She wrote it down on the corner of a paper bag because it was the only thing near her. Then she pulled up her phone and called the bank. The bank told her they couldn't give her information about the destination account. They could confirm the transfers were authorized by a signatory on the account. Ford had initiated them, as that was all they could say. She asked when he had been added as sole authorizing signatory. The answer came back. 14 months ago. Sloan put the phone down. She looked at Beckett's drawings on the refrigerator. A purple house with a yellow door. A dog they had always talked about getting. Their family is stick figures. Beckett's version: tall dad, medium mom, small boy, question mark in the corner where the dog would go. The question mark suddenly looked like something else entirely. 3 days later, Sloan's studio received a certified letter from a financial services company she had never heard of, notifying her that Mercer Design LLC had a lien filed against it for unpaid debts. Debts she had never signed for. Sloan called Wren Calloway at 7:30 in the morning. which was the only time she was ever sure Wren would pick up. Wren was a morning person in the extreme. Up at 5, coffee made, yoga done, mascara on. By 8, she was already performing her day. But at 7:30, she was still her actual self. They had been friends for 15 years. They met in a continuing education design seminar when they were both in their mid-20s, and both, as Wren liked to say, figuring out the sharp parts. Wren had eventually moved into PR, managing brand campaigns for design firms and architecture companies, which meant she and Sloane ran in the same professional circles without competing. It had always felt like the perfect arrangement. Wren picked up on the first ring. Sloane told her everything: the airport, Ford, and the woman, the bank transfers, the lien. She told it plainly, without falling apart. It was the way she had learned to tell hard things over years of not wanting to look like she was struggling. Wren was quiet for a moment when she finished. Then she said, "Oh, Sloane, I'm so sorry. That must have been devastating at the airport." Sloane said yes. Wren said, "What are you going to do?" Sloane said she wasn't sure yet. She was still processing. She asked if she could come over. Wren hesitated. Barely, maybe half a second. Then she said, of course, come whenever she'd put more coffee on. Sloane got in her Toyota, drove the 12 minutes to Wren's condo in Lincoln Park, and sat at her kitchen island for 2 hours while Wren listened and said all the right things. She was warm. She was careful. She asked the right questions. She poured refills without being asked. And Sloane felt, for the first time since the airport, slightly less alone. She drove home at noon. She checked her phone at a red light, a habit she knew was bad but couldn't break. There was a notification from a shared note app she and Beckett used to track his school schedule. She opened it by accident, meaning to close it, and saw a thread she didn't recognize. A message chain from a contact saved only as a phone number. She pulled over. She looked at the screen. The number was Ford's. She knew it by memory. The message was from Wren's phone, sent the previous night at 11:42, after Sloane had already called her. It read, "She found the account. She doesn't know the rest yet. You have time. Don't contact Delphi this week." The coffee in Sloane's stomach turned to something cold and chemical. Wren had known. She had known. And she had said nothing. And now Sloane understood there was no one left she could trust. There are moments in a person's life that don't announce themselves as the worst moment. They just arrive quietly, wearing the face of an ordinary afternoon. For Sloane, the bottom was a Tuesday in December, 3 days after the Wren discovery. She had not confronted Wren. She had not called Ford. She had sat with it, the way you sit with something too hot to touch. And she had done the only thing she could think to do. She had started pulling on the threads she could reach. The lien on Mercer Design was real. $41,000, tied to a business loan taken out in the company's name 11 months ago. Her signature was on the loan documents. She had never signed anything. The signature was hers in every visible way. The curve of the S, on the particular way she crossed the E, and it was not hers. Her business accountant, a small, precise woman named Gloria, who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, had called her that morning. Gloria had been doing the books for Mercer Design since day one. She said, "Sloane, someone filed a change of address for your LLC with the state. Your registered agent is now a company called Ashby Holdings Group." She paused. "You didn't authorize that." Sloane said no. She checked her business bank account. The operating account that she used to pay vendors, the account that had nothing to do with Ford or their joint finances, had a hold on it. Pending legal action. She could see the balance. $18,000, enough to cover 3 months of studio rent. But she could not move it. She picked up Beckett from school at 3, and he was quiet in the back seat, which was unusual. He was a talker normally, all run-on sentences about his day. She watched him in the rearview mirror. At a stoplight, she asked if he was okay. He looked at the window for a moment. Then he said, "Mom, is Dad coming home for Christmas?" She said she didn't know yet. He nodded slowly, like he had already been preparing for that answer. Then he said, "That's okay. I think you're doing a lot." She did not cry until she was alone in the car in the parking garage of their building after Beckett had gone upstairs with a neighbor's daughter, who sometimes watched him for an hour. She sat in the Toyota in the dark of level 3 and cried for exactly 11 minutes. She counted because counting was the only way to make it stop. Then she wiped her face. She pulled out her phone. She opened Google. She searched Chicago family law attorney, high conflict divorce, hidden assets. The third result was a name she recognized from a case Ford had once mentioned. A man he called the only attorney in Illinois who genuinely scared him, Theodore Vance. The call came at 9:17 on a Wednesday morning. Sloan was at the studio, sitting on the floor because the movers hadn't delivered the new desk chair yet, reviewing fabric samples for a client project that now felt almost absurd to care about. When her phone lit up, she didn't recognize the number at first. Chicago area code, but unfamiliar. She answered. "Sloan." The voice was older, measured, precise in a way that reminded her of someone. "It's Constance Ashby, Ford's mother." Sloan had spoken to Constance perhaps 40 times in 11 years. And the woman was polite, correct, and entirely unreadable. She sent birthday cards that were always appropriate and never warm. She attended Beckett's 5th birthday party and left after 45 minutes without explanation. Ford said she was simply private. Sloan had decided early on not to press for more. "Constance," Sloan said carefully, "I wasn't expecting to hear from you." "No, I don't imagine you were." A pause. "Are you somewhere private?" Sloan looked around the empty studio. "Yes." "Good." Another pause, longer this time, like the woman was choosing her footing on uneven ground. "I know what's happening. I know about Delphi Crane. And I know what Ford has been doing to your finances and your business." Sloan said nothing. She waited. "I want you to understand something," Constance continued. "I am not calling because I am a good person. I am calling because my son has done something that cannot be undone. And because my late husband Reginald, Ford's father, would be ashamed in a way I am not willing to tolerate in silence." Sloan set down the fabric sample in her hand. "There is a document," Constance said. "A will. Reginald's original will, not the version Ford's attorneys filed after Reginald died, which my son had altered. The original. I have a certified copy." "What's in it?" A beat. 40% of Ashby and Crown, the law firm, was left to you, Sloan. Directly to you, not to Ford. Reginald admired you. He told me once, 2 years before he died, that you were the only honest person in Ford's life. He wanted to make sure you were protected." Sloan's hand was shaking slightly, and she pressed it flat against her knee. "Ford altered the will before it was filed," Constance said. "He removed your share. The document he filed lists him as sole beneficiary. That is fraud. Federal fraud." The word landed in the studio like something thrown from a great height. "Why are you telling me this now?" Sloan asked. Constance's voice, for the first time, lost some of its controlled precision. "Because Delphi Crane is pregnant," she said, "and Ford told her to handle it quietly. And I am 72 years old, and I will not die having said nothing." Sloane did not hang up for a long time after that, and when she finally did, she called the one man Ford himself had said he feared. Theodore Vance's office was on the 31st floor of a building on Wacker Drive, with a view of the river that on a gray December morning looked more like pewter than water. The furniture was old, not deliberately rustic, just genuinely used. The kind of office that had never needed to perform wealth because the work spoke clearly enough. A framed print of the Illinois Supreme Court seal. A single shelf of case binders that went floor to ceiling. No diplomas visible. Vance had told an interviewer once that if you needed to see his credentials to trust him, you had come for the wrong reasons. He was 61. White hair still full. Suit jacket on despite the heat of the office. He shook Sloane's hand once, firmly, then sat down and folded his hands on the desk and looked at her the way people look at something they are about to take apart carefully. "Tell me everything," he said. "In order. I'll leave nothing out because you think it's irrelevant. Nothing is irrelevant." She told him. All of it. The airport, the transfers, the lien, Wren's message to Ford, Constance's call, the altered will. She had a folder. She had put everything in a folder the night before, organized, tabbed, because keeping her hands busy was how she kept herself together. She slid it across his desk. He didn't open it immediately. He listened to her finish speaking. Then he said, "The text message from Wren Calloway to your husband, you have a screenshot?" "Yes." "Certified copy of the original will from Constance Ashby?" "She's overnighting it to a notary today." He nodded slowly. "The business lien. Did you sign any document related to Ashby Holdings Group?" "Never." "Then your signature on the loan documents is forged." "That's a second felony." "Oh, separate from the will." He finally opened the folder. He looked through it with the calm of someone reading a menu. Then he looked up. "Who does Ford use for corporate legal work outside his own firm?" Sloane said she wasn't sure. "It doesn't matter, I know." He closed the folder. "Mrs. Mercer, I need you to understand something before we go further. Ford Ashby is a skilled attorney. He will fight this at every level. He will try to destabilize you financially, which he has already started. He will attempt to use your son as leverage." She felt her throat tighten. "He will file for emergency custody," Vance said plainly, "within the next 3 weeks. That's my prediction based on the pattern. He's already positioned himself as the stable, high-income parent. He's going to argue you're financially unfit." "Can he win?" Vance looked at her for a long moment. "Not if we move first." He picked up his phone and made a call she wasn't expecting. To a judge he'd clerked for 30 years ago, to request an emergency asset freeze on every account connected to Ford Ashby's name. The papers arrived at Sloane's studio on a Friday afternoon, hand-delivered by a courier she almost mistook for a client. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and had the return address of a Manhattan law firm she recognized, one of the largest in the country. Ford had not used his own firm. He had gone outside. That alone told her how serious this was. Emergency petition for temporary custody of Beckett Mercer, age 9. Filed on the grounds that the custodial parent, Sloane, was experiencing financial instability, a business insolvency, and an inability to provide a stable living environment. The documents cited the lien on Mercer Design. They cited the hold on her business account. They cited what they described as Sloane's erratic behavior following a period of marital stress. There was a declaration from an unnamed third party describing Sloane as emotionally volatile. She read it standing in the middle of the studio floor. Then she called Vance, He had already seen it. His assistant had been monitoring the court filings. "This is exactly what I told you," he said. He did not sound alarmed. He sounded like someone who had been handed the move they expected and was already 3 moves ahead. "The third-party declaration. I'd wager it's Wren Calloway." Sloan said nothing. "We counterfile by Monday," Vance said. "I need you to do 3 things this weekend. First, get a letter from Beckett's school. Attendance, grades, teacher observations, anything showing stability and parental involvement. Second, write a detailed account of your daily routine with Beckett. Every pickup, every meal, every appointment. Third, I need you to stay completely silent on social media and stop all communication with Wren Calloway." Sloan spent the weekend doing exactly that. On Sunday evenings, she sat at the kitchen table with Beckett doing homework. He was working on a project about Chicago architecture. He had picked it himself because he knew she loved it. He asked her how to spell cantilever. She told him. He wrote it down very carefully. At bedtime, he asked, "Is Dad trying to take me away?" She kept her face steady. "Dad and I are working some things out," she said. "I need you to trust me." He thought about it. "I do trust you," he said. "I just want you to know I'm not going anywhere either." She turned off his light and stood in the hallway for a moment with her back against the wall, eyes closed, and she made herself breathe. On Monday morning, the judge reviewing Ford's emergency petition denied it, citing a counter-filing from Vance that included 17 documented instances of Ford's absence from Beckett's medical appointments, school events, and emergency contacts over the past 2 years. Ford did not take the denial quietly. He called Sloan for the first time since the airport, not to talk, not to explain, but to warn. His voice on the phone was the voice she had almost forgotten, the one underneath the polished attorney exterior. Flat, cold, precise in the way a blade is precise. He said, "You think Vance can protect you? He can't. I have resources you don't understand." She said, "Okay." He said, "You're making a mistake." She said, "I've already made my mistakes, Ford. This isn't one of them." She hung up. That night, Beckett went to bed at 9. Sloan was at the kitchen table, reviewing documents Vance had sent over, when her phone buzzed with a notification from the app she used to monitor Beckett's iPad usage. He had sent a message. She thought he had messaged a classmate. She opened it. It was from an unknown number, which the app had flagged as new. The message read, "Hey, bud. It's Dad. Don't tell Mom we're talking, okay? This is my new number." Sloan's stomach dropped. She scrolled down. Beckett had not responded. The app showed the message delivered, I'd read, and then Beckett's reply. "I don't keep secrets from my mom. You can call her if you want to talk to me." And then, after a pause of 4 minutes, a second message from Beckett. "Also, I miss you. But I'm not going to lie for you." Sloan sat very still in the kitchen for a long time. She forwarded the entire exchange to Vance immediately. He responded in 12 minutes, despite it being 10:30 at night. "Perfect. Attempting to contact a minor through a secondary channel in the middle of a custody dispute. We're adding this to the file. Don't respond to Ford. Don't tell Beckett you saw it tonight." She didn't tell Beckett that night. But the next morning, over cereal, she told him she had seen the message. She told him she wasn't angry. She told him he didn't have to handle his dad. That was her job. And it was Vance's job. And it was not a 9-year-old's job under any circumstances. Beckett listened. He ate 3 bites of cereal. Then he said, "Mom, I feel like Dad is a different person now." She said, "He might be." He considered this. Is it my fault? Never, she said, and she meant it with everything she had. He nodded. Okay, he said. And then, can we get a dog when this is over? She laughed, the first real laugh in weeks. What she didn't know yet was that at that same moment, in a hotel room at the Lowe's Chicago O'Hare, Delphi Crane was recording a 2-hour conversation on her iPhone. Every word Ford had ever said about Sloan, the will, and the plan he had built over 3 years to dismantle her life. Delphi Crane was not what Sloan had imagined. She had imagined someone polished, calculating, a woman who knew exactly what she was walking into and made her choices with open eyes. She had imagined someone like the version of Ford she had just discovered. A person who moved through other people's lives with strategy and no particular remorse. What showed up at Vance's office on a Thursday morning was a 29-year-old woman who looked like she hadn't slept well in a month. No Louis Vuitton bag, a canvas tote from a bookstore, a Patagonia jacket, eyes that were red around the rims, not from crying right now, but from crying recently, repeatedly, over a long period of time. Delphi sat across from Sloan and Vance and folded her hands in her lap and said, I need you to know I didn't understand what he was doing to you. Not at the start. Sloan didn't say anything. She listened. Then he told me you had been separated for 2 years, Delphi said. That you had agreed to a quiet split and were working out the details. He said the finances were complicated because of your business partnership. He said Beckett was fine, that kids adapt. She paused. I believed him, because I had no reason not to. She opened her canvas tote and put an iPhone on the table. Not Ford's, her own, with a recording app open. When I told Ford I was pregnant, he didn't react the way I expected. He was very calm, very organized. He said there were steps we needed to take, and that it needed to stay private because of the divorce proceedings. He used that word. Proceedings. Like it was already filed. She looked at Sloan. Had he filed anything? No, Sloan said. Delphi pressed her lips together. He paid for everything. A clinic in Manhattan, a non-disclosure agreement. He said it was standard for privacy. I signed it. She pushed the phone toward Vance. But before I signed it, I had already recorded 3 weeks of conversations. On my phone. Because something felt wrong and I didn't know what to call it yet. Vance looked at the phone, then at Delphi. What's on the recordings? Him telling me that he'd moved Sloan's business accounts into a holding company he controlled. Him talking about having documents signed that she didn't know about. Him saying, and I'm quoting, by the time she understands what happened, there won't be anything left to fight over. The room was very quiet. I'm not doing this to hurt anyone, Delphi said. I'm doing this because I found out 2 days ago he did the same thing to a woman before Sloan. Different woman. A different city. Same pattern. There was a name in Delphi's recordings that no one in that room had expected to hear. And when Vance played the clip, Sloan recognized the voice immediately. The clip lasted 47 seconds. Vance had a small Bluetooth speaker on his desk. He connected Delphi's iPhone and pressed play without preamble. The recording was ambient at first. City noise, traffic, what sounded like a restaurant interior, low music in the background. Then Ford's voice, close to the microphone, relaxed in the way he only ever got when he thought no one important was listening. Wren's been handling the communications side. She's kept Sloan from asking the right questions for 3 years. That woman could manage a war and make the other side think they started it. A pause, then another voice. Wren Calloway, but she'll figure it out eventually. Sloan's not slow. Ford. By the time she does, it won't matter. The business will have the lien. The joint account will be clean. I'll have the custody filing ready. She'll be so busy trying to survive, she won't have the energy to fight. A longer pause. The sound of glasses. Wren. What do I get when this is done? Ford. What you were promised. The recording ended. Sloane sat very still. She had known about Wren intellectually. She had seen the text message. She had processed the betrayal on a logical level. But hearing Wren's voice on that recording, casual and collaborative, discussing the demolition of Sloane's life the way you discuss a quarterly plan, was something different. It landed differently. Deeper. 15 years. They had been friends for 15 years, and Delphi was watching her carefully. "I'm sorry," she said. "I thought you should know the full scope." Sloane nodded. She looked at Vance. He already had his pen out. The recording establishes conspiracy to commit financial fraud and obstruction. It corroborates the altered will, the forged loan documents, and the fabricated custody narrative. With Constance Ashby's certified copy of the original will and your documentation, Mrs. Mercer, we have 3 independent lines of evidence. He set the pen down. "I want to be clear about what this means," he said. "Ford Ashby is looking at disbarment, possible criminal charges. The law firm, Ashby and Crown, will face a civil suit for the 40% stake that was fraudulently removed from Reginald's will. Wren Calloway faces civil conspiracy charges at minimum." He looked at both women. "I need Delphi to agree to testify. I need Constance Ashby in the courtroom. And I need Sloane to hold together for approximately 6 more weeks while we build the filing." Delphi said, "I'll testify." Sloane said, "I've been holding together for 11 years. 6 weeks is manageable." What no one in that room had calculated yet was that Ford, sensing the walls beginning to close, was about to do something reckless. The kind of reckless that undoes even careful men. The copy machine on the 2nd floor of the building where Mercer Design rented space broke down on a Thursday morning, and this was how Sloane met Callum Bryce. She needed to print 40 pages of legal documents for a meeting with Vance that afternoon. The studio's printer had run out of toner the previous evening, and the replacement cartridge hadn't arrived yet. She knocked on the door of the office across the hall, an architecture firm she had seen listed on the directory but never had reason to speak to. And a man opened it who was holding a coffee mug in one hand and a pencil behind each ear. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of face that had clearly spent time outdoors. Late 40s, she guessed, dark gray at his temples. He was wearing a flannel shirt and dark trousers, which she registered as an unusual combination for an architecture firm on Wacker Drive. She said she was sorry to bother him. She asked if he had a working printer. He said yes and stepped back from the door without hesitation. His office was a large open space filled with drafting tables, scale models, and an enormous wall of windows facing north. There were 3 younger architects at desks in the back, working quietly. The whole room smelled of coffee and paper and something faintly like cedar. Sloane realized it was the first space she had been in for weeks that felt simply calm. He showed her to the printer, then went back to his desk without hovering or making conversation, which she appreciated more than she could easily say. The documents printed. She gathered them carefully. She thanked him. He said, "Anytime. The printer on this floor is actually reliable, which makes us the unofficial print shop for the whole building." She almost smiled. At the door, she stopped and turned back. "I'm Sloane Mercer. Mercer Design. Across the hall." He looked up from his desk. Callum Bryce. We've been here 4 years, and I don't think I've ever introduced myself to anyone in this building. Nah, that's embarrassing. It's a very focused building, she said. He laughed, quiet, genuine. She left. She didn't think about him again for the rest of that day because she had 40 pages of legal documents to deliver and a case to hold together. But that evening, putting Beckett to bed, she realized she had smiled twice since noon, and she could not account for the second time until she remembered the man with the pencils behind his ears and the calm office that smelled like cedar. She filed the thought away without examining it. And 2 days later, Callum knocked on her studio door with a coffee he said was left over from a client meeting. But she noticed it was exactly how she took hers. The Daly Center Courthouse in December had a particular quality of light. Gray and flattening, coming through tall windows in long, pale strips that made everyone inside look slightly washed out. Sloane sat in the hallway on a wooden bench outside courtroom 1704 in a charcoal blazer she had bought specifically for this, with Vance beside her and a folder of documents on her knees. Ford arrived 11 minutes after them. He had a team of 3 attorneys from the Manhattan firm, all in dark suits, all carrying briefcases. He did not look at Sloane when he came in. He looked at Vance, and something passed across his face. Not fear exactly, but the careful rearrangement of a man who has seen a problem he didn't fully account for. Wren was with him. She was dressed professionally, hair pulled back, expression set. She sat 2 rows behind Ford's legal team. She did not look at Sloane either. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Vance presented the evidence methodically, these in the order he had rehearsed with Sloane over 3 days of preparation. The original will, certified by Constance Ashby's notary. The forged signature on the Mercer Design loan documents, compared against Sloane's known signatures by a forensic document examiner. The financial transfers from the joint account to Ashby Holdings Group. The recording from Delphi Crane, admitted under Illinois evidence rules after a brief procedural argument. And then, projected on the screen in front of the courtroom, the email exchange between Ford Ashby and Wren Calloway. Their words appeared in large, clear font on the white wall, and the room was entirely silent while people read them. Sloane watched Ford's attorney put a hand on his arm. She watched Ford sit very still. She looked at Wren. Anna Wren was staring at the projected text with an expression that was not quite shame and not quite defiance. Something in between. Something that had no clean name. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with the careful expression of someone who has heard every possible human story and remains nonetheless attentive, called a 30-minute recess. In the hallway, Vance stood close and spoke quietly. The document fraud is confirmed. The judge will issue an opinion within 10 days. Ford's team is going to try to settle before she rules. What do I do if they offer a settlement? You listen, Vance said. You don't decide anything without me. She nodded. She looked down the long hallway. At the far end, near the elevator, Ford was speaking to his attorneys in low, rapid sentences, and she could see from the posture of all 4 of them that the conversation was not going well. What happened at the end of that hallway, what Ford said to his attorney in those final minutes before the recess ended, would be captured on a security camera and would change everything about the case. The security camera footage was pulled 4 days after the hearing. Vance had requested it on a hunch. A conversation with a bailiff who mentioned that courthouse security cameras covered the full length of the 14th floor hallway, including audio pickup near the elevator bay. The footage was not admissible in itself, but what it captured led directly to something that was. On the recording, Ford could be seen speaking to his lead attorney, a man named Grayson Park, in the hallway during recess. The audio was partial, fragmented by ambient noise. But 3 phrases were clear enough for a forensic audio technician to confirm: the Calloway woman. She needs to disappear from this, and whatever it costs. Vance did not use the footage in court. He used it to call Wren Calloway. He did not call her as an ally. He called her as a potential defendant, with a letter outlining the civil conspiracy exposure she faced, the email evidence already in the court record, and the specific phrase from the audio that suggested Ford was now prepared to let her absorb consequences alone. The letter arrived at her home on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, Wren had called her own attorney. By Wednesday, Wren's attorney had called Vance. The deposition was scheduled for the following Monday. Sloan was not in the room for it. Vance told her afterward, whilst in the matter-of-fact tone he used for everything. She gave us everything. Her role in managing your access to information, the payments from Ford over 3 years deposited to an account in her sister's name, and the original plan, which began, he paused, approximately 2 years before you moved back to Chicago. Ford began planning this before you left New York. Sloan absorbed this. He was preparing an exit before I even knew the marriage was ending, she said. Yes. She looked out the window at the gray river. A barge was moving slowly beneath the bridge. She thought about how many evenings she had stood in that New York apartment watching Ford leave for work, and had told herself that distance was just a season, that busy men come back, that love in long marriages looks different than love in new ones. She had been right that love looks different. She had been wrong about the rest. What happens to Wren? She asked. Vance said, she cooperated fully, which mitigates. But the payments and the documented conspiracy mean she faces civil liability. She'll likely settle. Her reputation in the PR industry? He paused. I'd expect that's effectively over. Sloan didn't feel satisfaction. She felt something more like exhaustion and a long, slow sadness. That evening she called Constance Ashby, and the old woman said something that Sloan had not expected from her. I'm proud of you. And then, quietly, Reginald would have been too. The custody ruling came on a Thursday, 11 days after the first hearing. Sloan read it on her phone in the studio, standing at her desk, one with a half-finished coffee beside her and a client mood board pinned to the wall behind her. The language was formal, structured, full of the careful legal architecture that surrounds the most human decisions. But the core of it was plain. Primary residential custody awarded to Sloan Mercer. Ford granted supervised visitation pending the outcome of the criminal fraud investigation. No unsupervised contact with Beckett until further order of the court. She stood very still for a moment. Then she called Vance, who had already seen it, and said, exactly as expected. Congratulations. She called her mother in Indianapolis, who cried before Sloan finished the first sentence. She did not call anyone else. She picked up Beckett from school herself, which she always did, and she did not tell him in the car. She waited until they were home, until he had his coat off and his backpack down and a glass of apple juice in front of him at the kitchen table. And then she sat across from him and told him that the judge had made her decision and that he was staying with her full time. Beckett looked at his juice for a moment. Then he looked at her. I know I didn't get to talk to the judge, he said, but I wrote something down on my own a week ago because I wanted to remember what I wanted to say. Sloan said, Can I see it? He went to his backpack and came back with a folded piece of notebook paper. His handwriting was still the handwriting of a 9-year-old, large, slightly uneven, but earnest. He had written, I want to live with my mom because she shows up. She shows up when I'm sick and when I'm not sick. She shows up when she's tired. She shows up when she's sad and doesn't want to. My dad stopped showing up. I don't know why. But my mom never stopped. Sloane pressed her hand flat over the paper. You saved us, baby, she said. Beckett shook his head. He had been thinking about this. She could tell. No, he said. You saved us first. I just told the truth. She got up and went around the table and held him the way you hold someone when the worst part is over, and the relief is so large it has no real shape. He held on too. He was 9 and small, and had been braver than anyone had any right to ask him to be. What neither of them knew yet was that 40 minutes away, in a glass and marble office on Michigan Avenue, Bill Ford Ashby was being formally served with 2 criminal indictments, and Ashby and Crown's senior partners were calling an emergency board meeting that would end his career permanently. The indictments were filed on the same morning the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission sent Ford a formal notice of suspension, immediate and indefinite, pending investigation of his conduct. The suspension meant he could not practice law anywhere in the state. The Manhattan firm he had used could not shield him. His name had been on the original documents. His voice had been on Delphi's recordings. Ashby and Crown, the firm built by his father from a 2-attorney practice in Evanston into a 40-lawyer operation with offices in Chicago and New York, held its emergency board meeting on a Friday. Vance had a contact at the firm who told him afterward, unofficially, that Ford had been asked to resign his managing partnership by a vote of 11-1. The one vote in his favor was a junior partner who had been at the firm for 8 months and who subsequently reversed his position when he saw the evidence packets circulating internally. Ford was out of the firm by the following Monday. The criminal charges were 2 counts of forgery, 1 count of wire fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy. His attorneys, the Manhattan firm, not his own, told him to expect a plea negotiation. There would be no jury trial if they were smart about it. The evidence was too clean and too documented. Delphi's civil suit was filed separately. She had her own attorney by then, and the suit was specific: breach of a verbal agreement, coercion in relation to a medical decision, and damages related to the non-disclosure agreement he had obtained under false pretenses. Her attorney was methodical and prepared, and the suit was filed in New York, which complicated Ford's geography considerably. Wren Calloway settled Sloane's civil claim for an amount that Vance described as appropriate. She did not contest it. Her PR firm, which had not known the full nature of her involvement with Ford, terminated her contract the same week the emails became public. Several clients followed. Her professional network, built over 15 years, contracted sharply and fast. Sloane did not follow any of this in real time. Vance kept her informed in measured updates, the way a doctor gives progress reports, factually, without excess detail, letting her process at her own pace. One evening she was putting Beckett to bed, and he asked, "Is it all done now?" She said, "Almost." He said, "What does almost mean?" She said, "It means the hard part is behind us, and the rest is just paperwork." He seemed satisfied with this. He turned over and was asleep in 4 minutes. She sat on the edge of his bed in the dark for a while, and she thought about something Constance had said. That Reginald had chosen her because she was the only honest person in Ford's life. And she understood finally that honesty had been the one thing he could never forgive her for. The 40% stake in Ashby and Crown was restored by court order in February. Vance walked her through the options. She could retain the stake and become a silent minority partner in the restructured firm. She could sell it back to the remaining partners at a court-appraised value. Or she could hold it as leverage in any future proceedings. She chose to sell. The number was significant. It paid off the fraudulent lien on Mercer Design, replenished the business account, covered Vance's fees in full, and left enough remaining that she could stop worrying about the studio's rent for 2 years. She cried in the parking garage again, but this time it was different. She hired 2 new designers in March. One was fresh out of the Illinois Institute of Technology, sharp and almost unbearably enthusiastic. The other was a woman in her 50s who had run her own firm for 20 years before a messy business dissolution left her looking for a new start. Sloan recognized something in her immediately and hired her on the spot, and the studio took on 4 new clients by spring. One was a restaurant group doing 3 locations in Chicago and 1 in Nashville. A large project, complex and rewarding, the kind of work Sloan had wanted for years. She stayed late often. She brought Beckett to the studio on Fridays after school, and he did homework at the spare desk and periodically offered opinions on fabric swatches that were, surprisingly, not wrong. Constance Ashby called once a week. The calls were still not warm exactly, but they were different, longer, with gaps that were companionable rather than awkward. Constance asked about Beckett. She asked about the studio. Once she asked if Sloan had met anyone, in a tone that was careful but unmistakably curious. Sloan said, "There's someone in the building who has been very quietly kind." Constance said, "Quietly kind is underrated." The someone in the building had, by then, shared 2 more coffees with Sloan, one lunch that went 90 minutes past what either of them planned, and a long conversation one evening about a building in Barcelona that they both believed was one of the most perfect structures ever made. He had not pushed. He had not performed. He had simply been present in the particular way that some people are, like a room that is always the right temperature. She was not ready. She knew she was not ready, but she was beginning to understand that not ready and never were not the same thing. Beckett had asked once, carefully, if she liked the man across the hall. She had said, "I think I might." He had nodded gravely. "Now he seems like someone who shows up," he said. In late April, Architectural Digest reached out to Mercer Design about a feature in their fall issue. And on the same day, Callum Bryce left a handwritten note under her studio door that said simply, "Congratulations. You've been building something remarkable. Would you like to have dinner?" The Architectural Digest feature ran in the October issue. 6 pages with photographs. The main image was the restaurant project, a dining room Sloan had designed in warm amber tones with curved banquettes and light fixtures she had sourced from a glassblower in Michigan. The room looked like what it was supposed to look like, a place where people felt held. The caption named Mercer Design, Chicago. Her name was in the header of the article. She saw it at the newsstand in her building lobby and stood there for a long moment just looking at it. Ford had pleaded guilty in August to 1 count of wire fraud and 1 count of document forgery in a negotiated deal that avoided trial. He received a 2-year suspended sentence, 3 years of probation, and permanent disbarment from practicing law in Illinois and New York. The civil judgment from Delphi's suit had settled separately. He had moved to Phoenix. She had heard from Vance's office, not from any desire to know, just as information that arrived the way information does. She did not wish him ill. She simply did not think about him very often. Beckett was 10 now and played soccer on Saturdays with his school team and had opinions about architecture that were becoming genuinely interesting. He had a dog, a medium-sized brown mutt named Ferris, after the city, because Beckett had campaigned for a Chicago name, and this was his first choice. Ferris slept at the foot of his bed and accompanied Sloan on her early morning walks and had, in his unassuming animal way, made the apartment feel more complete. Callum, dinner had been in May. They had gone to a small Italian place in Andersonville that neither of them had been to before. and the conversation had gone 3 hours. And at the end of it, he had walked her to her building door and said, "I'd like to do this again." She had said, "I think I would too." It had been slow. It had been careful. It had been, in every way that mattered, the opposite of performing. He showed up at the studio when she stayed late, at Beckett's soccer games when she mentioned them, us at the difficult moments with a practicality and a steadiness that she had stopped expecting to find in anyone. By October, they were simply part of each other's lives. Not everything had a label yet. Some things don't need one. Sloane sat one morning at the kitchen table with her coffee and the Architectural Digest open in front of her. Beckett was eating cereal and reading the back of the cereal box the way he always did, and Ferris was asleep under the table, and the Chicago light was coming in gray and clean through the window. She did not think about who she had been inside the wrong life. She thought about this one. She was still building. She had no intention of stopping. She didn't need someone to come back. She needed, and had finally found, a life that was entirely her own. So the story has finally come to a close. And if you are still here with us right now, truly still here all the way to this moment, then something in this story touched you. Maybe it was Sloane's silence at that airport carousel, holding her son's hand and choosing not to fall apart. Maybe it was Beckett's handwritten note. Maybe it was simply the feeling of watching someone lose almost everything and still find their way back to themselves. Here is what I want to leave with you today. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Sloane didn't control what Ford did. She couldn't control Wren's betrayal, or the frozen accounts, or the fear. What she controlled was the next step, every single time. That is not a small thing. That is everything. Because healing is rarely dramatic, and it doesn't arrive all at once. It looks like printing 40 pages of documents when your hands are shaking. It looks like telling your son the truth in a way he can carry. It looks like one quiet dinner, one honest conversation, one morning where you sit with your coffee and realize the worst is behind you. You are capable of that same quiet, stubborn courage. If this story moved you, if even one moment made you feel less alone, please hit that like button right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe to this channel, because we are going to keep telling stories exactly like this one. Stories about real strength, real healing, real women who rebuild. We'll see you in the next one. This story is a work of fictional drama created solely for entertainment and emotional reflection. And the characters, Sloane Mercer, Ford Ashby, Beckett, Constance, Wren, Delphi, Theodore Vance, and Callum Bryce, are entirely imagined. Any resemblance to real individuals, living or deceased, is purely coincidental. The events, legal proceedings, financial situations, and relationships depicted in this story do not represent real occurrences and are crafted purely for dramatic storytelling purposes. The locations referenced, including Chicago, Manhattan, and JFK Airport, are used as fictional backdrops only. Brand names mentioned throughout the story appear incidentally as part of realistic world building and do not constitute endorsement or sponsorship of any kind. Our goal with every story on this channel is to explore themes of resilience, self-worth, family, and emotional healing through the power of narrative. We believe storytelling, even when fictional, can carry real truth, and that sometimes a story that never happened can still say something deeply honest about the lives we actually live. Thank you for watching with an open heart.